Locked in a freezing truck, a rescue Bobcat family waited to die until his cat showed the way. The door of the Ford F-150 popped open after the screeching of metal rang out piercingly under the leverage of the crowbar. From the darkness of the cabin, two yellow eyes glowed fiercely along with a wild, threatening growl. But Arlo sullenly reached his hand in. Snap! The sharp teeth of the wild beast sank into his thumb, but the bite lacked force. It was only enough to pierce the leather glove, tearing a bit of his flesh. And then the beast's jaws gradually loosened. Her head slumped onto the seat, her whole body trembling in weak spasms. Arlo was startled, but he quickly regained his composure and continued his action as if that warning growl had never existed. That was because his world had been submerged in absolute silence since 10 years ago. He absolutely could not hear that lethal, threatening growl. Earlier that evening in the mechanic workshop, Arlo had been bent over welding iron. The torch flame burned white-hot against the metal, the monotonous, high-pitched screeching in his head, resonating with the garish welding flare, unconsciously dragged him back to the horrific memory of the boiler explosion years ago, the moment that stole his hearing forever. He remembered the factory floor that day, the pressure gauge needle climbing into the red zone, his supervisor waving frantically, mouth moving, words Arlo could not hear because he had his ear protection on. Then the world went white. The boiler tore itself apart. Metal shrapnel flew in every direction. Arlo remembered being thrown backward. He remembered his head cracking against concrete. He remembered waking up in the hospital with June's face hovering above him, her lips forming words he would never hear again. Arlo was drowning in that daydream nightmare when he started violently as a hand was placed on his shoulder. The welding torch slipped from his grip. He spun around. June, his wife, stood there with a pale face, her eyes glinting with panic. Her hands moved in urgent signs. There is crying, like a child out in the storm. A child. Arlo was stunned. In the middle of this storm, he pulled off his welding mask and set it on the workbench. His hands were shaking. Wind rattled the workshop windows. Snow piled thick against the glass. The storm had been raging since noon. Nugget, the fat, cream-colored tabby cat, was currently puffing up his fur on the windowsill, his eyes glued to the battered pickup truck buried in snow in the backyard. The iron tomb that Arlo always wanted to forget. The cat's tail lashed back and forth like a metronome. His ears lay flat against his skull. His whole body vibrated with tension. He paced the windowsill, shouting and insistent. Arlo grabbed his thick coat from the hook by the door and snatched up a flashlight, rushing out into the snowy night. The cold hit him like a physical blow. Wind tore at his clothes. Snow stung his cheeks and forehead. Nugget also dashed after him, shooting across the thick layer of snow. His small body moved with surprising speed. The cat led him straight to the buried Ford F-150. The truck sat like a ghost in the storm. Snow had covered it completely. Only the antenna stuck up through the white blanket. Nugget scratched frantically at the driver's side door. Looking back at Arlo with urgent green eyes, the cat meowed, his mouth open wide. Arlo could not hear it, but he saw the desperation in those eyes. Arlo shone the light in. The glass was frozen thick with ice crystals, but through a small gap near the window frame, he saw glowing eyes reflecting back. Not a child. Wild animals. He faced the desperate gaze of three trapped bobcats. The mother crouched in the driver's seat, her body curved protectively. Two tiny bodies huddled against her belly, barely visible. Arlo ran back to the workshop for his crowbar. His boots slipped on the ice. He caught himself against the doorframe. His heart hammered in his chest. When he returned to the truck, he wedged the metal bar into the doorframe. The door had frozen shut, ice bonded metal to metal. He pulled hard. The frozen door resisted. He braced his foot against the truck body and pulled again with all his strength. His muscles screamed. Metal shrieked. The door gave way with a sound he could not hear but felt through his whole body. That was when the mother lunged and bit him. Her teeth found his thumb through the glove. Pain shot up his arm. But then her strength failed. Her jaws loosened. Her eyes rolled back. After that fateful bite, after her head slumped and her body went limp from exhaustion and fever. He quickly threw a tarp over the exhausted mother beast and tucked the two little ones into his chest. Rushing back to the workshop, the kittens weighed almost nothing. Their tiny hearts hammered against his ribs like rapid drum beats. Their needle-sharp claws pricked through his shirt and undershirt, drawing pinpoints of blood. They mewed soundlessly in his deaf world, their mouths open wide, their small bodies shook. Back inside the workshop, the warm air from the wood stove did not soothe the tension. Nugget, the one who had led the way to save their lives, now jumped up to the highest shelf, fur standing on end, eyes wide with alertness. Every hair on his cream-colored body pointed outward. He looked twice his normal size. He looked at Arlo with eyes full of reproach. "I told you to save them, not to bring monsters into the house." From that moment, Nugget lay up high, supervising every move of the uninvited guests. His tail twitched continuously. His pupils stayed wide and dark. He watched the newcomers the way a prison guard watches dangerous inmates. Arlo unwrapped the tarp and looked at the mother bobcat. She was barely breathing. Her sides heaved with effort. Foam flecked her lips. He needed to build something to contain her before she woke up. Wild animals were dangerous when cornered. Injured wild animals were more dangerous still. Arlo cleared a corner of the workshop, dragged out old steel mesh sheets, and turned on the welding machine. The welding fire flared, casting harsh shadows on the walls. The smell of hot metal filled the air. The whirring sound of the grinder rang out in the night. Though Arlo heard none of it, he worked by muscle memory. Measure twice, cut once, weld the corners, check the joints. Sparks showered onto the concrete floor, dancing like tiny orange stars. In just 30 minutes, a sturdy steel field hospital had been erected. The cage stood 4 feet tall and 6 feet wide. The mesh was small enough to prevent escape but large enough to allow air circulation. The welds were solid. The door latched securely, strong enough to hold a wild animal, secure enough to keep everyone safe. Once the cat family was locked in the cage, Arlo realized Bramble's hind leg was broken and the wound was severely infected. The leg bent at an unnatural angle below the knee. Dark red streaks ran up from the break, spider webbing across her fur. The skin felt hot to the touch, even through her coat. Fever burned in her body. Her temperature had to be dangerously high. If the infection spread to her blood, she would die within days. June immediately returned to her nursing instinct. She had worked in the county hospital emergency room for 15 years before Arlo's accident. She had seen broken bones. She had treated infections. She knew what needed to be done. She disappeared into the house and returned with her old medical bag, the leather worn soft from years of use. Arlo turned the dining table into an operating table, sweeping off the accumulated mail and newspapers onto the floor. He spread clean white sheets across the wooden surface. June used her dexterity to clean the wound and set the bone. Her hands moved with practiced confidence, the same hands that had treated hundreds of patients over the years. She irrigated the wound with saline solution, flushing out dirt and debris. She felt along the bone with gentle fingers, testing the break, determining how many pieces. Just 2. Thankfully, a clean break. She aligned the pieces carefully, rotating the leg until the bone ends met properly. They worked so seamlessly that they did not need a single word or sign, only their eyes and gestures blending together. Arlo held the unconscious cat steady. June stitched the torn muscle. Arlo applied pressure to stop bleeding. June wrapped the leg in gauze. A decade of marriage had taught them this silent language. They had developed it slowly after his accident, learning to communicate through glances and touches. Now it was second nature. Arlo steadied the leg. June splinted it with tongue depressors and medical tape. Arlo held. June secured. Back and forth. A perfect team. When it was done, they stood back and looked at their work. The mother bobcat's leg was immobilized. The wound was clean, but infection had already taken hold. June signed to Arlo. "She needs antibiotics. We have none." Arlo signed back. "Will she survive without them?" June hesitated. Then she signed. "Maybe, if her immune system is strong, if we keep the wound clean. Maybe it would have to be enough." June brought clean, pure white cotton towels from the linen closet to line their nest. The towels smelled of lavender laundry detergent, fresh and chemical. They were soft and thick, the kind June bought from the department store in town. But the moment she put them into the cage, Bramble's eyes snapped open. She frantically clawed and threw them out through the mesh. Her lips pulled back from her teeth. Her eyes went wild with panic. The strange chemical smell made the wild beast extremely agitated. To her, the scent meant danger. It meant humans. It meant captivity. She hissed and spat. She backed into the corner, shielding her kittens with her body despite the pain in her broken leg. The kittens, Rust and Ash, were shivering on the cold iron floor of the cage. Their eyes were still closed, sealed shut with the membrane of newborns. They were perhaps 3 weeks old, still completely dependent on their mother, too young to regulate their own body temperature, too young to survive alone. They mewed and crawled blindly, seeking warmth and milk, their small pink mouths opened and closed. Arlo observed this. He watched the mother's reaction. He watched the kittens shaking. He understood they needed something rougher, something that smelled like the world they knew. Not the sterile human world, but the world of dirt and trees and animal musk. He quietly took off the old quilted coat he was wearing, the coat stained with machine oil, smoky from the fireplace, and redolent of his sweat. The fabric was worn soft from years of use. He had owned this coat for 15 years. Grease darkened the elbows where he leaned on workbenches. Soot smudged the collar from loading wood into the stove. The cuffs were frayed. One pocket had torn and been sewn back. He threw it into the cage. Bramble sniffed the coat cautiously. Her wet black nose twitched. She recognized the familiar scent of the one who had saved her minutes before. She remembered those hands lifting her from the truck. She remembered being carried through the snow. That smell had surrounded her during the journey. It meant safety, not danger. She slowly lay down, curled up on that filthy coat, and allowed the 2 little ones to nurse. Her body relaxed muscle by muscle. Her breathing steadied and deepened. The kittens latched on with tiny mouths and suckled, their paws kneading against her belly. The following days were a series of difficult adaptations. The workshop developed a routine, but it was punctuated by mistakes and learning. Arlo frequently walked too close to the cage unintentionally because he could not hear the warning growls. He would approach to refill the water bowl, his mind on other things. Bramble's throat would rumble with menace, a low sound that said, "Stay back." Arlo would keep walking, oblivious. Bramble would lunge at the mesh, her teeth bared. Metal would clang. Arlo would startle and jump back, his heart racing each time it happened. He felt the same jolt of adrenaline. June watched this happen 3 times on the second day. On the 4th approach, she intervened. She taught him a new skill. She placed Arlo's hand flat on the iron cage frame. The metal was cold against his palm. She pointed at Bramble and waited. When Bramble growled, the iron frame vibrated intensely. The vibration traveled up through Arlo's palm, into his wrist, up his forearm. It was a physical sensation, undeniable and clear. Arlo's eyes widened. He understood immediately. He learned to hear Bramble's mood through his fingertips. Iron vibrating meant back off. Iron still meant it was safe to resupply. He practiced this over and over, developing a new sense. He would approach with his hand on the frame, moving slowly. When he felt the vibration start, he would freeze mid-step. He would wait. When the vibration stopped, he would move forward again, inch by inch. It took time, it required patience, but gradually he learned to read her moods as clearly as if he could hear. Life in the workshop gradually settled into a new chaotic order. The smell of cat urine mixed with machine oil, creating a pungent combination. Wisps of fur floated in the air, catching the light from the windows. Water bowls and food dishes crowded Arlo's workbench, pushing his wrenches and screwdrivers to the side. The floor needed sweeping, twice a day now. Arlo's tools got relocated to makeshift shelves. The workshop had been transformed from a place of work to a place of caregiving. Nugget climbed onto the roof of the iron cage to sleep, asserting his dominance in the only way available to him. His big fluffy tail hung down through the mesh, swinging to tease Bramble below. The tail dangled just beyond her reach, cream-colored and luxurious. It swayed back and forth like a pendulum, an irresistible target. Bramble jumped up to pounce but only hit the steel mesh. Her claws scraped against metal with a screech. Nugget smirked. or seemed to, continuing to sleep with the triumphant air of a superior. He stretched out on top of the cage, claiming it as his throne. He was still the king of this domain, even if he had to share it with interlopers. Seeing the two wild kittens, Rust and Ash, jumping around strictly inside the cage, their young bodies testing their growing strength, Nugget also took a run up, executing a jump from the floor to the kitchen table. He had watched the young bobcats leap and climb with effortless grace. They could jump 3 times their body length. Surely he could do the same. He crouched. He wiggled his hindquarters. He launched himself upward. But Nugget had misjudged his body weight after years of comfortable house living and regular meals. Thud! He slipped and fell to the ground, landing hard on his side. His impact created a tremor that even Arlo could feel through the concrete floor. A cloud of dust rose around him. Nugget stood up quickly, looked around to see if anyone had witnessed his failure, then pretended to lick his fur with great concentration, while Bramble watched him from inside the cage with a gaze of judgmental contempt. Her amber eyes narrowed. Her expression was unmistakable. If she could laugh, she would have. Even wild animals understood hubris and its consequences. The two kittens, Rust and Ash, also found their own joy in captivity. They did not play with balls of yarn like domestic kittens. They had no interest in toy mice or feathers on strings. They found screws and springs that Arlo had dropped on the floor over years of work. Their keen eyes spotted every bit of metal, every small object. The clang. Clang sounds as they batted the screws against the iron bars became the only music in the gloomy house. Metal rang against metal in an irregular rhythm. The kittens pounced and swatted with intense concentration. They chased the screws across the cage floor. They practiced their hunting skills on inanimate prey. Arlo watched them play with his scrap metal one morning, and for the first time in months, he smiled radiantly. Future mechanics right there. He signed to June. His face relaxed. The permanent crease between his eyebrows smoothed out. His shoulders loosened. Something hard inside him softened. He had not realized how much tension he had been carrying until it released. One morning, Arlo stood by the window drinking coffee, looking out at the Ford F-150 covered in snow, looking like a white burial mound. The truck sat silent and still in the gray dawn light. Icicles hung from the side mirrors like crystal daggers. Snow drifted against the wheel wells, nearly covering the tires. The truck had been sitting in that exact spot for 10 years. Arlo had not driven it once since the day they arrived here. 10 years ago, right after the accident that took his hearing. Arlo had driven this very car, carrying June to flee from the noisy city. He remembered loading everything they owned into the truck bed: clothes, books, kitchen supplies, tools, everything that mattered. He remembered June's parents begging them not to go. The city had resources for deaf people, support groups, special services, but Arlo could not stay. Every street corner reminded him of sounds he could no longer hear. Every conversation excluded him. Every moment was a reminder of what he had lost. He had driven for 8 hours straight, pushing the old Ford to its limits. June had cried beside him for the first 3 hours. Then she had gone silent, staring out the window. He was grateful to the truck for bringing his couple to safety, for getting them here without breaking down. But he avoided it after they arrived because every time he saw that steering wheel, he remembered the feeling of helplessness of that day. The day he drove in absolute silence with a face full of tears. He remembered gripping the wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. He remembered June crying beside him, her shoulders shaking. He remembered the terrible emptiness in his head where sound used to be. The absence was louder than any noise. But today, looking out the window, he saw the footprints of the kittens printed on the hood of the car. June had let Rust and Ash out for exercise yesterday afternoon. The snow had stopped temporarily. The kittens had climbed all over the truck with feline curiosity. Their small paw prints dotted the snow-covered metal. 4 toe pads and a heel pad, repeated dozens of times. He realized this car had completed its mission of saving people 10 years ago. And now, it continued its mission of sheltering life for Bramble's family. The truck had given them escape. It had given the Bobcats refuge. The truck had not failed anyone. It had served faithfully twice. Arlo turned to June, signing gently. It is a good ship. It never abandoned anyone, including us, including the cats. For the first time, he had truly forgiven his past. The weight he had carried for a decade lifted from his shoulders. The shame dissolved like snow in sunlight. The truck was not a symbol of his brokenness. It was a symbol of survival, of endurance, of shelter provided when shelter was needed most. 3 weeks into their cohabitation, disaster struck. Ash, the smaller kitten, got her legs stuck in a cabinet gap and screamed miserably. Arlo had his back turned to the cage, organizing washers by size on his workbench. The small kitten had been exploring the workshop during her exercise time outside the cage. She had squeezed into a narrow space between two heavy wooden cabinets. Her back leg slipped through a gap in the base. She panicked. She twisted. The gap tightened around her leg. She cried out with all the force her small lungs could produce. June, who had been in the kitchen making lunch, heard it immediately. She ran into the workshop. She dropped to her knees beside the trapped kitten. She gently worked the small leg free, wiggling it carefully back through the gap. She checked for injury, running her fingers along the tiny bones. The kitten was fine, just frightened. Her leg was unbroken. No blood, no swelling. When Arlo turned around moments later and saw that scene, his face changed color. The blood drained from his cheeks, leaving him pale as paper. He backed away from his workbench, stumbling. His hands trembled as they touched his ears in an unconscious gesture. The helplessness of the past rushed back, suffocating his heart like a hand around his throat. 10 years ago, Arlo and June had planned to have children. They had picked out names, Emma for a girl, Jack for a boy. They had started preparing a nursery in their apartment, painting the walls a soft yellow. They had bought a crib, but the explosion happened, stealing his hearing. In the hospital, while the doctors were still running tests, Arlo was already making his decision. He was haunted by a terrifying thought that would not leave him alone. If the baby cries in the middle of the night and I don't hear it, if the baby falls and calls for dad, but I am still fast asleep, how could he keep a child safe when he could not hear danger? How could he be a father when half his senses were gone? He had told June in the hospital, "We cannot have children. Not anymore." She had cried. She had argued. She had said they would find a way. But Arlo was immovable. He would not risk a child's life on his disability. Now, watching June with Ash, seeing how quickly she had responded to a cry he never heard, the old wound opened fresh. He had been 3 feet away. The kitten had been in serious distress, and he had known nothing. He had been completely unaware, useless. That night, Arlo could not sleep. The what-ifs tormented him. What if Ash had been seriously hurt? What if June had not been home? What if, what if, what if? He sat in the workshop in the dark, watching the cage by lamplight. He needed to find a solution. He needed to be able to respond. Arlo began installing convex mirrors around the house and moved his workbench so he could always see the cage. He mounted small curved mirrors on every wall. Angling them with precision, he tested the sight lines obsessively. He could see the cage from the workbench. He could see the cabinets from the stove. He could see the back door from the kitchen table. Now he could see around corners. He could see behind his back without turning. He learned to hear with his eyes. He learned to watch constantly, scanning the mirrors every few seconds. He learned that vigilance could replace hearing if applied rigorously enough. One night, 2 weeks later, Ash cried again due to a nightmare. The small kitten twitched in her sleep. Her paws paddled the air for as if running. She mewed in distress, a sound full of fear. This time, Arlo, who was staying awake to keep watch as he did most nights now, saw it immediately through the reflecting mirror. The mirror on the far wall showed the cage. He saw the small gray body thrashing. He saw Bramble wake and nuzzle her daughter, but Ash continued to cry. He went to the cage immediately, moving quietly across the workshop floor. He gently reached his hand in through the mesh to stroke and reassure the little cat even before June woke up. He touched her soft head with 2 fingers. He made soothing circular motions. Ash's eyes opened. Reflecting lamplight, she saw him. She recognized him. She calmed, her body going still. Her breathing slowed. He held the cat in his arms through the mesh, tears welling up in his eyes. The small, warm body nestled against his palm. Her purring vibrated against his skin, a physical sensation he could feel even though he could not hear it. He realized in that moment that he could absolutely be a good father, in his own way. He did not need to hear to be present. He did not need sound to care. He needed to pay attention. He needed to watch. He needed to be there, and he could do all those things. The realization hit him with the force of revelation. Bramble, despite the injury to her hind leg, still tried to drag herself to the water bowl every day. Her leg was healing slowly but remained weak. The bone had knitted, but the muscles had atrophied. She could not put full weight on it yet. She limped and lurched, pulling herself forward with her front legs. The journey from her corner to the water bowl was only 6 feet, but it took her significant effort. June intended to help one afternoon, reaching for the water bowl to bring it closer, but Arlo stopped her with a hand on her wrist. Don't let her do it herself. He looked at the beast with absolute respect. He saw his own image in her. She was fighting to maintain her independence despite her injury. She was refusing to become helpless. She would rather struggle than accept help that diminished her. June had become the ears for him for 10 years. Massive gratitude came with the fear of becoming burdened to the person next to him. He loved her for everything she did, but he also worried constantly that he was too much, that she had given up too much, that she deserved better than a broken husband. He understood that love is sometimes the act of restraining help to preserve dignity for the one you love. Sometimes the greatest kindness is stepping back. Sometimes love means watching someone struggle because the struggle itself is important. In the last days of winter, the coal workshop had become a true home. The space felt lived in rather than just functional. The cage no longer seemed like a prison. It was simply where the Bobcats slept and ate. The cats moved with ease now, comfortable in their routine. On a rare noon with sunlight, a beam of light shone through the south-facing window. Dust motes danced in the golden shaft like tiny stars. The light was warm and honey-colored. Nugget was quick to occupy the first spot in the sunbeam. He sprawled with complete abandon, his cream-colored fur glowing like he was lit from within. His large belly rose and fell with each breath. Then, Rust and Ash tiptoed over to lie next to him. They had grown braver over the weeks. They trusted the big house cat now. They understood he was not a threat. Rust curled against Nugget's back. Ash tucked herself against his belly. Finally, Bramble also left the dark corner where she usually rested, limping into the light. She lay down at the end of the sunbeam. Her spotted coat gleamed, the rosettes distinct and beautiful. 4 cats arranged in a vertical line, 4 bodies soaking up the rare winter sun, 4 sets of lungs breathing in rhythm. June sat in the rocking chair near the window, working on an embroidery. She started humming softly, an old melody her grandmother had taught her as a child. Her voice rose and fell with the tune. It was a lullaby about birds in springtime. Arlo did not hear the melody, but he saw the reaction. He saw the ears of all 4 cats turn toward June in unison, their eyes half closed in contentment. All 4 faces pointed the same direction. All 4 bodies relaxed deeper into the sunbeam. He knew his wife was creating magic. Her voice soothed the wild and the tame alike. It crossed the boundary between human and animal. He signaled to June with a smile. Look, the planets have aligned. She looked at the 4 cats and smiled back. Her eyes crinkled at the corners. She kept humming, not wanting to break the spell. Then spring also came, right on schedule. The snow melted over the course of 2 weeks, revealing patches of young green grass beneath. The ground turned muddy and soft. Crocuses pushed up through the wet earth, purple and yellow. Birds returned from their southern migrations. Robins hopped across the yard. The air smelled different, filled with moisture and growing things. The world was waking up. Arlo knew it was time. The decision sat heavy in his chest. The Bobcats were healthy now. Bramble could walk without limping, though she favored the injured leg slightly. Rust and Ash had grown strong and quick. They were nearly adult size. They were ready. He opened the workshop door wide one morning and removed the barriers he had placed. He unlatched the cage door and swung it open. It was time for Bramble's small family to return to their true home. The forest waited beyond the tree line. The wild world called them back. They belonged there, not here before leaving. Ash, the smallest child, ran back to rub against Arlo's leg. She wound between his ankles in a figure-8 pattern. She pressed her head against his shin hard, scent marking him. Arlo knelt down on the concrete floor, his knees cracking, hugging her for the last time. He buried his face in her soft fur. She smelled like pine needles and fresh air. He whispered into the soft fur words he could not hear. I heard you. I have always heard you. Hot tears rolled down his cheeks, washing away the haunting torment of the past 15 years. He had heard these animals in the way that mattered most. He had listened with his heart. He had paid attention with his whole being. He had been present for him. June stood behind him, wrapping her arms around both of them, crying silently. Her tears fell into Arlo's hair, warm and wet. The three of them stayed like that for a long moment, locked together. Then Ash pulled away gently and ran to join her family. Bramble led her 2 children out, decisive and strong. She walked through the workshop door without hesitation, without looking back. Russ followed close behind her, his muscles rippling under his red-tinted coat. Ash reluctantly pulled away from Arlo and ran after her family, looking back once. But when she reached the edge of the forest, 50 yards away, Bramble stopped. The trees rose dark and tall before them. The undergrowth rustled with unseen life. She turned her head, looking straight into Arlo's eyes for the last time. A look that no longer held fierce wildness, but contained a deep acknowledgement. She saw him. She knew him. She understood what he had done. She would not forget. June smiled through her tears, and Nugget, standing beside his master on the workshop threshold, gave a gentle purr like a goodbye to his strange roommates. The sound vibrated in his chest. Then the 3 bobcats turned and melted into the shadows between the trees. The forest swallowed them. They were gone. The workshop felt suddenly empty. 1 year later, winter had returned in full force. The cycle continued as it always did. Arlo and June were clearing snow around the Ford F-150 on a bright February morning. The car had now become a monument planted thick with wildflowers by Arlo when summer came. Purple coneflowers and black-eyed Susans surrounded the truck in a riot of color during the warm months. The flowers had gone to seed now, their dried stalks poking through the fresh snow like skeletal fingers. Arlo had planted them deliberately, transforming the burial mound into a garden. Suddenly, June patted Arlo's shoulder urgently and pointed toward the truck. Her eyes were wide. On the hood of the car were Ash and Rust, now muscular, mature lynxes. They had doubled in size over the year. Their coats were thick and glossy with winter fur. Their legs were long and powerful. They sat side by side, watching the humans with calm eyes, under the chassis, in the shadows. Bramble was lying to avoid the bright sun, her eyes half closed, observing her children. She looked content. She looked at peace. Her injured leg was stretched out before her. They had chosen this car as a place to hold their nostalgia and show their gratitude. They remembered this place. They remembered being saved here. They returned to honor it. They were wild animals. Yes, but they had memories. They had feelings. They had chosen to come back. Arlo smiled, his eyes wet. The painful past never disappears. But if we sow compassion into it, it will bloom into new life. Suffering could transform into meaning. Brokenness could heal into strength. Loss could become a gift given forward. A blizzard fell again that night, whitening the Montana sky. The wind picked up after sunset. Snow swirled in dense curtains. Arlo and June sat by the fireplace in the house. Flames crackled and popped, throwing dancing shadows on the walls. Heat radiated into the room, pushing back the cold. The house was empty of bobcats now. No cage cluttered the workshop. No wild animals prowled the corners. But Arlo was not sad. He took out a self-made photo album, flipping through the pencil sketches he drew of Bramble's family. Each page held a memory captured in graphite. Bramble sleeping on his coat, her body curled tight, Russ batting a spring across the cage floor. Ash drinking from this water bowl, her pink tongue visible. Nugget sitting on top of the cage like a furry emperor. He had drawn them all with careful detail. The drawings were good. June had encouraged him to frame some. Nugget lay on his lap now, purring gently. The old cat was warm and heavy, a comforting weight. His cream-colored fur was soft under Arlo's hand. Arlo closed his eyes, placing his hand on Nugget's back, feeling that gentle vibration, and smiled contentedly. The phantom sounds that had tortured him for years, the endless, high-pitched whine that had driven him nearly mad, had finally faded to nothing. Loneliness is only scary when our hearts are hollow, when the heart has been filled with memories of love. Silence also becomes the sweetest music. The quiet was no longer empty. The silence was no longer terrifying. It was enough. He had learned to hear in new ways. He had learned that paying attention was a form of listening, that presence was a form of speech, that love required no words at all. Every rescue begins with a heartbeat that refuses to give up. We're grateful you chose to listen to this one. If you'd like to hear more stories like this, a simple like or subscribe means the world to us.